right, folks. All right, folks, we're going to get started soon. So I'll ask everyone to grab your last bits of coffee, cream and sugar. Come on back. So we've had an exciting and stimulating morning, and I hope you've enjoyed our conversation and our discussions so far. So we'll let everyone come on back to their tables, and we'll get our panel started. So maybe I'll introduce our panelists, or at least the moderator, while we're getting seated. So this is the first of two panels, and it continues our theme of community engagement in research, and of course, vice versa. This panel is on provider engagement in research, and I'm so honored to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Heather Bittner-Fagan. Heather is the Director of Research in the Department of Family and Community Medicine at Christiana Care. She's a Value Institute scholar. She's a co-director of the CEO component as well. And please help me in welcoming Dr. Bittner-Fagan.
Hello, thank you for that nice introduction, Omar. My name is Heather Bittner-Fagan, and I am going to lead a panel discussion about how do we engage providers, all providers, but with some focus on physicians, into research. And I'm very excited about the panel that we have here, and I will introduce each and every one of them individually as they speak to you. But first, I want to frame the discussion. And I think especially for those of you who might be a little bit outside, those of you who may be here representing the community, you might be really surprised to learn that not all physicians and providers see themselves as researchers. And in fact, sometimes we are in incredibly separate communities, such that if you came to a typical meeting and could read the thought bubbles around people's heads, it would be sort of something like, no, my work is more important. No, my work is more important. And until we can kind of get our own shop in order, some of this work that we need to do about engaging the greater community is going to be especially hard. I can't emphasize enough how important it is for the physicians and the researchers to see themselves as one community and to build those bridges for multiple reasons, not just because physicians are a conduit to the populations that we hope to serve, but also because they're a particularly powerful conduit across many, many fields of research and community advocacy. We know that the provider's recommendation really matter. People trust their providers and their physicians and are going to be more likely to implement a particular scientific finding or to participate in a trial if their physician or other provider recommends it to them. And this is just sort of a very simple slide to frame the issue, kind of somewhat, I will admit, stolen from UCSF's community engagement site. And it just points out that when we think about engaging the really any community, but specifically the physician community, that we're really talking about opportunities to engage them along a spectrum, from fairly unintensive ways to more intensive ways. And so we can think about engaging the physicians, simply as, a conduit. Please put a sign up in your office about my study, to something much more intensive, to figuring out, we know that there are these things that need to get done, and how can you help us to define the priorities and get this out into the populations that we really care about. So, without much more ado from me, because I really want to get to our wonderful speakers, I'm going to introduce first Arch Manus. And as you can see, Dr. Manus is the endowed chair of health services research at the University of Florida. I have known Chip, actually, for a really long time. He originated at the Medical University of South Carolina. I often tell people that he is the superstar of family medicine in terms of his level of publication in family medicine and primary care. And what's not in his bio that I would just add is that Chip has a really long and rich experience of working with physicians and really has trained numerous primary care physicians to be researchers, including myself. He's been a mentor to me for a long time, so I'm excited to introduce him.
Thank you. Well, Heather, thanks a lot. Let's see. Oh, how do I get to my slides? Just keep going. Just skip over everybody else. Keep going. Okay. All right. So I've done a lot of research on how you try to get physicians to participate in research, as well as how do you get patients to participate. One of the things that comes up is that, as Heather said, many physicians, providers really don't do research. In fact, actually, when we think about physician investigators, that's actually becoming a bit of a dying breed, unfortunately, because I think they bring, a certain level of knowledge to things. But there are a lot of things that you will encounter when you try to get physicians to participate. And you say there's a lack of time. That's true. So as we all know, there's a lot of pressure to bring in clinical income. But one I think that gets lost a lot of times is no real inherent interest in research. All right? And I think that's very important because some of the stuff that we've done has shown that when you take folks, they say, oh, I just don't have time, it just isn't worth it. But really, some people do seem to find the time. And not just that, we see a lot of practice-based research networks. It's very commonplace. So why would these folks participate and a lot of other people not? Well, part of it is inherent interest. Now, so you have to really make it so that they have a perceived benefit to them and their patients. And so it must be something that I think that what happens is a lot of top-down ideas really don't appeal very much. So if you come in and you say, I've got this great idea and we just want you to provide all your patients to us because you're out there, I don't think that works very well. I mean, think about community engagement. That very similar. You say, we're going to come into your community, we're going to do this because it's good for us, and we just don't have enough Pima Indians, So you say, here's where we're going to go. So I think the issue is you have to get them to see a benefit to themselves and their patients. Remember, they're supposed to be representing the best interests of their patients. Another thing that happens, and we're doing this right now, we actually are doing a study, which is a trial within trials, funded by NIH, to how do you get more minority patients into trials. We know that minority patients tend not to participate. We know that it's an NIH mandate that minorities be included. So how do you get them in? Well, so we have to work with physicians and come up with strategies to deal with community, a lot of times community physicians, as well as patients. But many physicians out in the community are reluctant to participate because they think that the researcher is going to steal their patients. Okay? So once again, it comes back to something Dr. Ford was bringing up over and over, trust. So there has to be trust between the patient and the physician. There has to be trust between the investigator and physicians back to the investigator. And so you have to make that clear to them that you're not going to steal their patients. That if they refer a patient into a trial, that they're going to get the patient back. Remember, this is an economic exchange here. So what are the barriers to patient recruitment? Well, financial and time constraints. Obviously, you have some of those things going on. Can they get there? Transportation, child care issues. Is it really worth it? They have to think about that. Inclusion and exclusion criteria, and then actually we missed a bullet here, mistrust of researchers. But the inclusion and exclusion criteria, that actually becomes a big problem too. So when we try to look at how you get people into some trials, sometimes the inclusion and exclusion criteria are so specific that it's very hard to find people. So you say, well, we want to put somebody with hypertension, but they also have, 12 other criteria. Sometimes it's hard to find them. But mistrust of researchers is really what I want to focus on when we start talking about this, because trust is the key. We found that that relationship building is most important, in both the physician to investigator as well as the investigator to patients. So what we did was we went back and we looked at, as we were going through to create this trial among trials, we looked at what are the barriers to minority participation. Mistrust is the primary limitation, okay? So you can never really forget that. What we also know is a patient's personal physician's recommendation of the patient is the strongest factor for the likelihood of participation. So if you can recruit physicians, then you will be able to get patients, much more so. I mean, there are many other strategies. I'm sure people out there say, well, we'll go to the churches, or we'll put up flyers, or we'll connect with community leaders. That's all true, but when the patient goes back to their own physician and says, I was at church, and they told me about AIDS, and they told me, but this thing is about diabetes. I'm stealing your stuff, Carolyn. So then you're going to have to say that it's up to the physician to then be the interpreter of that and to help with that. So we know that that's how it really works. So what we did years ago was we went through and we created a trusted medical researcher scale, okay? And that scale was built in a way because we know that some people are going to be higher in their trust of researchers and others are going to be lower. And when we wrote the items, we did a lot of think aloud interviews. We had folks go through it and read it. And so it affects things like, is this in the physician's best interest, but not in my best interest, in the researcher's best interest? And I think that's an important thing. So you have to think about it. To build that trust, the people have to feel like you're acting in their best interest. So, and I mention this because actually just in the last week, I had a commentary in BMJ saying that I think that investigators, particularly as personal physicians, need to declare if they're getting financial reimbursement for enrolling that patient. They need to tell them that maybe there's something financially that they're benefiting. And so I think we need to do that. What we find is minorities score lower. We also find that minority-serving physicians, you're trying to build relationships with them, minority-serving physicians tend to have lower trust in researchers than other physicians. They tend to mirror the attitudes of their patients. They're trying to act as advocates for their patients. We also know that those lower scores are correlated with a lower likelihood of future participation by patients and a lower likelihood of referral by physicians. So I think that we need to think about that. Now, there are a lot of strategies to do that, but one is be honest, be open. But a lot of folks will say, well, what's going to happen is you need to acknowledge the community physicians. That's all true, but that's one thing about building that relationship. You want to indicate that what you're doing is you're working with them. They're not basically being exploited. So I think that if we think like that, and we'll see what the other folks have to say, I think if we think like that and build those relationships and try to be honest in disclosure, then I think everything will go a lot better. So assure your patients' physicians you're looking out for their best interest. Assure them you're not using them for your own gain. Assure them that you will not treat their patients badly and with little respect. In fact, there have been focus groups that have come out where that physicians say, I'm concerned about sending my patients to the big academic medical center because they're treated poorly there. Minority and disadvantaged patients are treated worse, and so I'm just not going to do it. They're treated with very little respect. They're treated as guinea pigs. You also need to assure them of the safeguards for their protection. Okay? Many folks, they can read an informed consent, but they may not know that the investigators have had to do the city training or some sort of training before they do it. Also emphasize altruism and academic stimulation. For many of the physicians, for practice-based networks, it's about academic stimulation, some sort of intellectual stimulation and participation. With patients, getting them to think that this is actually good. We're going to do something not so much for you, but for other people you know. So, that's it for me, and I will move on.
And I do want to let you know that there will be an opportunity for everyone to ask questions at the end. I just want to go back here. All right, so next we have Dr. Tom Bauer from Christiana, who is the Chief of Thoracic Surgery at the Helen F. Graham Cancer and Research Center. And when, when I hear physicians potentially complain that they can't possibly participate in research because of time, I would be inclined to point out Dr. Bauer, who is a very busy and active surgeon, but manages to find time to conduct the highest level of research, to teach the next generation of researchers through his work with the IMBRI program in Delaware. Dr. Bauer and I share a passion about lung cancer screening, and he has graciously volunteered his time with the Delaware Cancer Consortium to address these issues. So I'm going to ask Dr. Bauer to come up next.
So I want to thank Heather and everyone for your time today. Heather had asked me to make 3 slides and to elaborate on how you build a successful research program. And I thought, well, that's easy. It's only 3. And then, you know, it's easier to give an hour talk than it is to try and take everything that you do and distill it down to a couple slides. So I did that, and hopefully it will come across well. I thought I would start with 3 quick stories. These are things that I was involved in, but by no means do I want you to walk away saying this was something that I had done. Each one of these represented a team of people, and within my 3 slides, I couldn't list all those people. So first, I'll start with LCAP. That's Early Lung Cancer Action Program. It was there was 2 lung cancer screening programs. One was the NLST, which I'm sure all of you have seen the publications and all of the fallout as to after you spend $280 million to prove lung cancer screening is of benefit, to then find out that, well, we may not be able to afford to do it, so we're not going to pay for it now, and then everything that's going to come from that. We participated in ILCAP. It was a study that had started in Cornell, expanded to New York, and then it was an international program. The program had been open for several months at Christiana. I was fortunate enough to be able to lead it, and the program went from focusing on lung cancer screening to 5 grant-funded projects that came from that. And the point I want to make here is being mission-centric. We decided that we were going to focus on lung cancer screening. We formed a Lung Cancer Prevention and Screening Institute within the Graham Center, and then embarked on doing everything we could, and we focused on finding lung cancer earlier in a multitude of ways. So out of LCAP, which was a purely non-paid program that actually cost us money to run, we were then able to do a smoking cessation program. We received funding from Christiana. We got match funding from the American Legacy Foundation, and that ended up equaling $250,000 to do lung cancer screening and smoking cessation research. The Flight Attendant Medical Research Institute, those were the flight attendants that had a class action suit against the tobacco companies and won $300 million. We were fortunate enough to be selected out of all of the LCAP sites to receive funding to look at secondhand smoke. And so here was another program that enabled us, even though we weren't charging for lung cancer screening, that we were able to receive funds to keep the program going, and we looked at secondhand smoke. We had been successful through all of this, and at the time we started at LCAP, there were 18 sites worldwide. By the time we finished screening, there were 58. And out of those 58 sites, we just stayed focused on what we were doing. We were successful, and we kept getting then chosen to participate in other programs. One was breath testing. I'm sure it hasn't happened to anybody in this room, but if you've seen other people get pulled over for drinking and driving, you see that they're exhaling and they're measuring alcohol content in your breath. You can measure butane and a series of other volatile organic compounds. And so we worked with a company, and out of the 5 university programs that were participating in that, Christiana was second in terms of accrual onto that study. And again, it was looking for the profile of organic compounds in your breath as a method of identifying those people that were at risk for developing lung cancer. We then got asked to lead a national trial on sputum cytology with a company that was in New Mexico. And so here we are in Delaware, and a company from New Mexico is coming saying, here's a couple $100,000, we'd like you to lead our program and help us run this. And then finally, there was 15 sites worldwide that got asked to participate in a neoadjuvant tyrosine kinase inhibitor assay. All of that's really not important, other than if you think research is hard, trying to get patients to undergo therapy prior to their surgery, go through surgery. When you're diagnosing them with lung cancer and then you start talking about research, it becomes very difficult. And how do you balance their care with the importance of learning and conducting research is really a delicate balance, but with everything that Dr. Petrelli's built at the Cancer Center, at the Graham Center, it's made it very easy to do that. And so out of those 15 sites worldwide, Christiana got asked to be part of that, and we ended up being second in terms of accrual to that study. And so that one program, which started relatively simply as doing smoking cessation or lung cancer screening, just kept growing. And I really believe it was because we stayed focused on our mission of lung cancer screening. A second short story, and then I'll go through the slides, was a number of years ago, we wanted to build a tissue bank, and Dr. Petrelli made an excellent argument to all the benefits, and those slides were glossed over by Dr. Ford, and so I'll elaborate on it a little bit. And without going into the reasons behind doing it, it was an important program. So we set up all the things that needed to be done for that. And we started as one of 2 community cancer centers in the country that was doing tissue banking. We started with lung cancer, then Dr. Petrelli expanded to many other tissue sites. But he focused on the quality of the work. And one of the things that was mentioned by Dr. Ford was the research protocol and conducting the research. And so we spent a lot of time with an excellent team of people on that project and demonstrated that the quality of the tissue that we were harvesting and freezing adhered to all of the protocols, so that the RNA and the DNA was of high quality, and that the clinical information that we also collected was of high quality. What that enabled us to do is then go to CALGB. It's one of the cooperative groups. They had a grant for doing lung cancer tissue banking. And when I asked if we could participate in that, they said, well, it's really only for the university programs. And I said, well, if you just give me a minute, let me show you what we've been doing. They said, okay, well, we'll come look at Christiana. And all you had to do was come onto our campus and see the program that the Graham Center had built. And it was an easy yes for them. They looked at our quality, they looked at our data, and we were able to participate at a cooperative group level, which meant more research and more research dollars to continue to do the research that we were doing. The next step was then Dr. Petrelli applying and being part of the the TCGA, the tissue bank run by the NCI, and we're one of a few sites around the country getting to participate in the banking to identify the Cancer Genome Atlas Project. And so that was one little thing that started at the Graham Center and continued to grow into something that was much larger. And finally, the IMBRI program. And I don't think our representatives and our governor are here yet still, or they are. I want to thank them because it's the 23 states in the country are underrepresented in NIH funding. And so we were part of a grant to try to take Delaware out of being underrepresented, and the success of the program ideally would be that we no longer qualify to be part of that program because we've received so much research monies. And that was to build research infrastructure and education. And so in order to do that at Christiana, we had to increase the number of people actually doing research and also the education. And so without going through all the programs we had done, a few years into my time at Christiana, my father was a surgeon, so I grew up knowing medicine and was very motivated to do what I did. But there's a lot of people that didn't have those exposures. And so I felt it important that if we could nurture the intellect and the curiosity in our young people, that they would grow up to be the people that wanted to do research. And if all I did was try to take people who have been doing clinical practice for 20 years and tell them why it's important, that is what we need to do, but without affecting our future, I thought I was unlikely to succeed. And so to just outline one program we did, I took students and I said I was willing to take one student, and I got money from University of Delaware to pay the student. And then once they found out what I was doing, I got a phone call to say, hey, could you take two? And I said, sure. And then about a week later, I got another phone call to say, hey, could you take a third student? I said, okay, but no more. And then once a couple of faculty people at Christiana found out I was doing this, I got a phone call from Dr. Petrelli saying, hey, so-and-so wants you to take a student. I said, absolutely. By the time we were done, I had 6 students that summer, and I thought, my God, what have I done? And so now I have 6 people staring at me going, teach me. And while I'm taking care of patients, operating, and everything else. And so we started to build a program of how do you keep these people busy? How do you develop a research program? How do you get them CITI trained? All of the paperwork that needs to happen for students to be on our campus. And we developed a program. Fast forward a couple years, I get asked to lead our IMBRI program. So that was an opportunity to say, we did this, it was very successful, so I'm going to do it some more, only I'm not taking 6 students again, and there's no way I'm taking 15. So I have to go find other people who are willing to do this. So now you have to sell the idea of how this is of benefit. And so that first year, I had 15 students apply. I had 15 faculty members apply, and I thought, that's perfect. I have the funding for 15. Anybody that asked got to do it. And so now we go another 3 years. This past summer, we're about to start our program for the 4th time as a campus-wide program. I had 80 applicants from students. I had 40 faculty members apply to have a student, which was a marked improvement across our campus, of which I've funded 15 students that are going to get $3,000 to do a clinical research project for this summer. I have another 10 students who are volunteering their time, and I had approximately 40-some or more students that I had to turn down because I did not have enough room for them, and another 10 or 15 faculties that I will try to link them with students to help them get through the process. And so it's been an overwhelming success. And just to highlight one project that came from this, and without this program, maybe the people would have been doing their research, but one project was to look at the reason that people get phone calls when they're on cardiac monitoring. You know, that's 8,000 phone calls they needed to go through. And our cardiologists are exceedingly busy doing all of their patient care and all the other research and clinical trials they're doing. But to go through the logs of 8,000 phone calls just didn't really seem appealing. You need a student to be able to do this. So one of the students sat down with a cardiologist, went through the program, and that resulted in changing how Christiana does